G'day friends, it's Mad back with the final skill tree breakdown for our Vault monster slaying friend Amon. This time around, we're covering the Calamity tree. Now, it's not as if we had much of a choice in the matter since I already covered the Vengeance and the Cybernetics tree already, so without further ado, let's move forward into the Calamity tree. But before we do, just want to let you guys know that I'm going to be posting even more guides about Amon, mechanics and builds that you guys might find useful if you're interested in Amon, so if you are, feel free to subscribe if you aren't already and stay in the loop for anything I post soon. So, as for Amon's Calamity tree, what does it do exactly? Well, it places a huge focus on elemental damage, melee damage, and tanking through shield regeneration and overshield generation as you proc damage to the enemies through melee or just standard gun or ordnance damage. Much like each of the other trees, there's a unique bonus tied to this tree overall, and this time around it comes in the form of weakness. Weakness is a status effect that Amon can apply to enemies through skills like Gut Punch and Maiming Strike in the Calamity tree, which result in affected enemies taking more damage and making them deal less damage at the same time. There's some powerful utility in this tree outside of just that debuff in general, but that just so happens to form part of Amon's highest damage builds, which conveniently I do have some guides and videos for on the Mobilitics website and on my channel, so feel free to check them out. I'll link them in the description down below. The primary action skill for this tree is Onslaughter. When Amon activates Onslaughter, he readies his Forge Fist and gains constant shield regeneration, bonus incendiary damage to guns, as well as increased movement speed. Pressing the action skill button while this is active will launch Amon to the enemy in his crosshairs and punches them, dealing incendiary melee damage in an area around them, causing them to stagger. It's perfect for an up close and personal style of gameplay. But Augments and such can change the way this plays and gives you added utility to make some really powerful builds, and we'll talk to that shortly. From a Forge skill perspective, we have Forge Slam, which basically makes Amon slam a flaming hammer onto the ground in front of him that deals incendiary area of effect damage to enemies in the area that the hammer was slammed in, and leaving a bit of a flame dot as well for a short duration on the ground. In saying all that, there's a lot to get through, so let's get cracking. Starting with Trunk skills and tier 1 as always. We kick things off with Impetus, which gives Amon increased shield regeneration and movement speed for a short duration. Keep in mind that this is a kill skill and can stack. The next skill we have is What Burns Within, and this is a very self-explanatory flat incendiary damage boost. Keep in mind that because this is a bonus to incendiary damage, it'll basically scale with any other skill or weapon or ability, ordnance, so on and so forth that can do incendiary damage, and they will get bonuses from this skill as well. So don't sleep on this, even though it's just a tier 1 skill. We then follow this up with Discombobulate, that gives Amon's melee the chance to crit. Now while this may seem like a very surface level skill, it's far from it. This skill has a long spanning effect that can result in some of your action skills being in this tree, and other trees as well, doing increased damage as a result of being able to have a higher chance to crit. To round out tier 1 skills, we end with Heavy Plate, which gives Amon a very straightforward increase to max shield and overshield capacity. Pretty handy if you're planning to make a build that focuses on large shield capacity and taking damage. To start in tier 2, we have Wielder Storm, a skill that gives Amon increased status effect duration and damage. Now while we haven't touched on this yet, the weakness debuff it's considered a status effect, and as a result we'll receive bonuses from skills like Wielder Storm and any other skill that boosts status effect duration. Conveniently, the next skill we can talk about is Gut Punch, which is a skill that gives Amon the capability to apply weakness to an enemy. This is done through doing either melee or ordnance damage, and you get a chance to apply it as a result of Gut Punch. And as this may lead you to assume, this can proc from damn near anything Amon can throw at enemies. Any form of augment or action skill that does melee damage can now proc weakness. Any form of ordnance that does melee damage can also proc this. So yeah, very useful, and you'll see this a lot in any optimized Amon build that wants to maximize the damage output. The next skill in the tier 2 section is Tritanium Knuckles, which gives Amon increased melee damage and skill damage. Much like a few of his other skills, while this skill looks simple on paper, it scales well with any of Amon's action skills and also a few of his other damage boosting procs in his tree, such as Dragon Breath, which we'll talk about shortly, but that's much further in the tree, but we'll get to that soon enough. Now let's talk about Augments, and as tradition dictates, we have 2 to discuss in the trunk. First one is Pyroclast, which is triggered once Amon enters Onslaughter. Pyroclast gives Amon immediate full health and shield regeneration, and surrounds himself in a Forge Storm that deals incendiary status effect damage to enemies in the range of it. For every enemy Amon kills, the duration of Onslaughter is partially restored, as well as increases the damage of the Forge Storm itself. The next augment we have is Thermal Diffusion, which now gives Amon 2 different punches. One punch can deal incendiary melee damage, and the other can deal cryo melee damage. However, they both receive increased radius buffs, as well as a damage bonus that scales with its maximum shield capacity. Now, tier 3. Starting things off, we have Forged in Steel, which gives Amon the ability to become immune to all damage for 6 seconds after activating a Forge skill. This skill could be particularly useful if you optimized your build for Forge skill looping. If you can get the cooldown to be quick enough, you can have immunity active for most of your combat encounters, which obviously makes staying alive a lot less of a challenge. Next we have Bullet Storm, which is a powerful conditional gun damage bonus, which is activated whenever Amon applies a status effect. As I mentioned at the start, Amon has a lot of ways to guarantee or increase the chances of applying a status effect, so being able to get some easy access to gun damage bonuses has a high level of utility throughout the tree. Metal Urge is up next, and this gives Amon increased action skill cooldown rate for a duration whenever he deals gun damage. This effect can stack as well, so it can be quite handy to make sure you can keep popping Onslaughter. The final skill in tier 3 is the best defense, in which Amon can now gain overshield whenever he deals melee damage. The level of overshield receives scales based on the amount of melee damage you've dealt, and naturally, the higher number of melee damage you hit, the bigger the overshield bonus. Branches. So, let's start with branch 1, left side of the tree. Before we start talking about the skills, let's get the augment out of the way. For branch 1, we have Fellfrost, a very fun augment in which Amon more or less gains an execute capability to his forge fists. Whenever Amon presses his action skill button after a rocket punch, he immediately follows up with another punch that deals cryo melee damage to a large area in front of him, and tying back to the execute ability I mentioned earlier, any non-boss enemies that are hit by Fellfrost and are less than 25% HP are immediately killed. Pretty handy, right? Now for the skills. We start with Berserk, an incredibly powerful skill which is triggered after Amon activates his forge skill. Once he does that, Amon enters a state known as Berserk, in which he gains slow immunity and gets bonus cryo damage added to his gun and melee. The next skill we have is Bloodlust. After having his shield broken, Amon gains Bloodlust for a duration, which gives him increased reload speed and lifesteal. Bloodlust can also be activated by an action skill triggering as well, so pretty handy for pinch situations where your life forecast starts to look quite bleak. The next skill we have is There Is Only Red, one of Amon's strongest skills in this entire tree. This skill can only be specced into if you have Berserk, and for good reason. This is a kill skill that can partially restore the duration of Berserk on each kill, as well as increasing the bonus cryo damage by a significant amount. It can also stack quite highly, so the damage bonus is only further extended. Rhyme Break is the next skill to talk about. Rhyme Break partially restores shield and detonates upon shield breaking completely, and this explosion deals cryo damage to all nearby enemies, which freezes them. Pretty handy utility, to be honest. Next, we have Brimming Vigor, which gives Amon increased max health capacity and increases melee damage based on how full his health is. Pretty self-explanatory. We then have My Touch's Death, which can trigger an incredibly powerful self-sustaining damage loop with the right gear equipped. My Touch's Death gives Amon the chance to activate all kill skills whenever he deals melee damage. And guess what? The skill just above, There Is Only Red, is a kill skill. Wink wink, nudge nudge. We finally get to the capstone, and for this branch we have Hawkcleave. Hawkcleave replaces Molten Slam with a large cryo melee damage forge wave that freezes enemies that it passes through. Any enemies that are killed by Hawkcleave cause a detonation, which deals cryo damage to nearby enemies as well. Good stuff. Branch 2. To get Branch 2's augment out of the way, let's talk about Force of Nature, my personal favourite augment in this tree. Force of Nature now allows Amon to prime enemies with gun damage, which can then cause a detonation if they die or are hit by a forge skill. Any enemies detonated then deal incendiary damage to nearby enemies. While Force of Nature is active, primed enemies can also be detonated through melee damage, but the resultant detonation damage is slightly reduced. Moving into Branch 2 skills, we start with Into the Fray. For this one, Amon gains increased damage dealt and increased damage reduction based on how close he is to the enemies. The bonus of this maxes out as soon as you get close as you can to the enemy, so it's very encouraging for an up close and personal gameplay loop. Next we have Burning Ramparts. This gives Amon increased weapon fire rate and status effect chance, and the bonus is scale based on how full his shields are. Similar working operations to Brimming Vigor in Branch 1. We then have Harbinger, a skill that gives Amon increased melee damage and max shield capacity for a duration, and this effect can stack as well, so keep that in mind. Next up we have Rearm, a handy dandy utility skill that partially reloads the magazine off his current gun whenever he deals damage with a melee attack. Maiming Strike is up now, and this is the second skill in the tree that can help you proc the weakness debuff onto enemies. This time around, makes it way easier to proc weakness, as Maiming Strike gives Amon the chance to apply weakness to enemies on critical hits with guns. As you can possibly piece this together, this means that any crit chance related bonuses are going to synergize incredibly nicely with this skill. Finally, we have Mortal Flare, which makes enemies detonate provided they have the weakness debuff applied to them at their time of death. This detonation deals incendiary melee damage to nearby enemies. Onto the capstone now, and we have Molten Roll, and this basically puts Molten Slam on steroids. Molten Roll now gains increased radius and stores damage, which is then thrown out in the form of flaming pyres that spawn underneath enemies after a short delay. These flaming pyres deal additional melee incendiary damage and scales with the amount of damage stored by Molten Slam. Moving to tier 3, and we start with the augment, which is Fulminating Fist. Plays quite nicely with an elemental damage / status based build for Amon. Fulminating Fist gives Amon increased status effect chance while Onslaughter is active, and pressing the action skill button again launches a wave of lightning in front of enemies that deals shock melee damage to enemies as it passes through them. This skill has a nice synergy with a follow-up skill called Fist of Stone in this branch, but we'll get to that soon. From a skill perspective, we start with Catastrophe, a very nice conditional damage bonus. Whenever Amon applies a shock status to an enemy, he gains increased crit chance, and whenever he applies an incendiary status effect to an enemy, he gains increased crit damage. A bit of a yin and yang situation, if you will. We then have Dragon's Breath, an oh so juicy skill that forms a massive part of a lot of his high damage potency Amon builds. Upon activating his ordnance, Amon's next gunshot is converted to incendiary damage, staggering enemies damage by it, and gaining increased damage, kind of like an amp. This bonus already provides a huge number, but also scales with any skill damage skills like Titanium Knuckles all the way back up in tier 2 of the trunk in this tree. Dragon's Breath is an incredibly powerful skill, and if you want to see an optimized build that makes heavy use of this skill, look no further than my Hellshot Amon build. I'll link that in the description down below, and I'll also have a link to it in the top right now. Next skill we have is Judgment, which increases the melee damage that Amon deals to enemies when they are below 50% HP. Pretty straightforward here. Now, we then have Fist of Stone, which I briefly mentioned just then. Fist of Stone restores a percentage of Forge skill cooldown whenever Amon deals melee damage, and melee attacks double this effect. So while Fulminating Fist works very nicely with this build to act as a way to reduce cooldown off the Forge skill, certain pieces of gear like the Slippery Grenade as well, which deals melee damage, can mean that throwing a single Slippery Grenade can restore your Forge skill cooldown very quickly. Incredibly useful, don't sleep on it. Getting close to the end now, and we have Crackling Aegis. Very similar to Burning Ramparts and Brimming Vigor, Crackling Aegis gives Amon increased status effect damage and ordnance damage based on the level of your shields. If you want to make sure you're maintaining the damage bonus from this skill, make sure your shields are topped up and you got an overshield working overtime. Final skill we have is Electrical Fire. Yet another powerful status effect skill that should be found in an optimized Amon build that focuses on maximizing dot potential. Electrical Fire makes it so that anytime Amon burns an enemy, he applies shock to them, and vice versa. Pretty damn handy. And now, we finally made it to the capstone, Stormcutter. A very fun capstone to use, and also some incredible utility behind it as well. Instead of slamming a flaming hammer, Stormcutter throws out a Forge Wave that deals shock melee damage to any enemies hit by it. For every enemy that gets hit by Stormcutter, Amon gets a small portion of action skill cooldown, action skill duration, and ordnance cooldown restored. Looping Stormcutter means you could reliably maintain both Onslaughter and Ordnance uptime, which can be the key to maximizing your overall damage potential with your builds. So yeah, that's pretty much every skill explained in the Calamity Tree. Hope you guys found it useful. Now that I've wrapped up the skill tree breakdown, the rest of my Ultimate Amon Guide videos are going to be focused on builds, mechanics, and gear combinations, synergies, and all those sort of things that will be pretty useful for you guys in your Amon build crafting journey. So if you've got any questions, feel free to join my Discord. Feel free to subscribe as well, because I'll be posting these videos more and more. Catch you all in the next guide. See ya.